Welcome to this video on writing feedback versus criticism. This video is for thesis and dissertation student supervisors. So if you are supervising any kind of graduate student writing, but particularly the dissertation, this video is for you. There are many students writing dissertations or writing for publication feel anxiety when receiving feedback. And this is because there's a huge emotional investment in writing, and for some students, their whole sense of self is at stake. Feedback is an essential part of formative assessment and in shaping students' identity, so feedback is really important. It's fundamental to learning and to producing quality writing, but it can be a huge source of anxiety for students. And there's a lot of research out there to support the idea that although feedback is important, students find it very difficult. The purpose of this video is really just to introduce the idea of a difference between criticism and feedback and to provide some suggestions and strategies for providing feedback that helps students to revise in ways that build confidence in their writing. So anxiety around writing often prevents students from succeeding, and we want to turn that around. So research shows that a lack of specific feedback or superficial feedback or unclear feedback or inconsistent feedback and one-way communication can all lead students to respond negatively to writing. And there are two common types of responses to writing in academic contexts, and these are criticism and feedback. Criticism focuses on the person, it's hurtful, it aims to wound, and often the writer can't use this feedback in a practical way. So if you say you are a terrible writer, there's nothing really that the person can do with that. Whereas feedback focuses on the purpose of the writing, it's supportive, it provides a response the writer can use. And that's the kind of feedback we want to give to students. There are also different ways of responding to writing. We all respond to writing emotionally, but sometimes this isn't really helpful for students. So if we say, I love this writing or I hate this section, even if it's positive, there's very little a student can do with that. But if you focus on criteria, I can't see what the purpose of your paper is. So this is very specific. The writer can then rework the purpose and make it clearer for the reader. Now we know that students react emotionally to criticism. We all react emotionally to criticism. And the responses can have a huge impact on how students write and how they approach writing. So often, students will react to criticism by feeling ashamed and embarrassed. And one of the responses is to ignore the feedback because it is too painful. Another response is to get angry with the person giving the feedback and thereby not hear the feedback that could be really helpful. Another really common response is to procrastinate on writing, to avoid writing in the future so that you prevent being criticized again. And overall, this builds to experiencing more of an imposter syndrome. Why did I think I could do this? And then students lose confidence. But we know that students need feedback. Feedback is so important because feedback is what helps us improve our writing. It helps us learn and grow. We grow as writers. Feedback also helps us improve the way we approach writing and our whole attitude to writing, as long as it's building our confidence. It helps us achieve our writing goals and, of course, our other goals in terms of our program success. And the person giving the feedback role plays our intended audience. So it's really important for us to get reader feedback. There are different types of specific feedback, but what I would suggest is prioritizing the complex issues over the surface issues, particularly in the early drafts. As the drafts become more stable, then focusing on the surface issues. But to take a paper that is in an early draft and focus on grammar can be very discouraging for students. The more complex issues are the kind of conceptualization issues, the big questions, the genre itself, is the genre appropriate, the structure and the transitions. And then provide feedback that the writer can use. Note the well-written parts as well as the parts that need revision. And by doing this, the writer can replicate what they're doing well. Really, what we want to do is normalize the idea of revision, of feedback and revision. And our whole academic publishing system is built on feedback and revision. So we want to normalize this for students. One of the ways to help students see what you're looking for is to group your feedback. So you might, for example, group feedback on argument and evidence. And this is where you show the writer that you as the reader you are not convinced by the writer's argument or evidence. You could also group the feedback on the conceptualization, the big building blocks of a paper, the problem, the knowledge gap, context, conceptual framework, the purpose of the research, the methodology, and the key research questions. Maybe these aren't aligned, maybe there are some contradictions. You can comment specifically on smaller things like definitions of key terms and why I'm doing this paper. Is that clear for a reader? You can comment on originality. I mean, writers don't have to come up with something totally original, but you want it to be interesting. And there are lots of ways of adding knowledge or showing interesting material. So you can encourage your writer to lead to interesting conclusions throughout the paper or thesis. You can give feedback on coherence and flow. For example, if you group this as one body of comments, you can show your student writer how to focus on coherence and flow. Are the paragraphs linked? Does a reader have to go back? Is the beginning and the end appropriate? Are they appropriate? And to think about how the reader comes to the story. There are other ways to group your feedback. If you want to comment on accuracy and precision, perhaps you're focusing on references, then group this as an intellectual endeavor rather than a superficial formatting issue, where you say it's really important for your credibility as a researcher to be accurate. As you read, note when you're engaged and when you're pulled out of the writing. Even marking that for a reader is important. I wasn't, I was drawn out of the writing at this point. Mark those sentences. Was it clear or understandable? And your reader will be able to fix those specific points. So here are some examples of positive feedback. The opening paragraph really held my attention. It helped me understand why your research question is important. I noticed that I was really connected to your writing in this paragraph. The way you explained the research in this article caught my interest. I wanted to read more about this. Those positive comments are really important for student writers. Other prompts for feedback: is your research problem in this sentence? There you're highlighting for the writer that it's not clear. I had to read this section over and over. I found it difficult to understand this concept. Could you add more material? I think this section is about X, but it doesn't really fit here. Am I right about this? I'm not sure what this means. Could you explain it to me? I'm confused about how this paragraph links to that one. Often the student writer knows what they're doing, but they haven't expressed it well. So asking them these kinds of questions will help build their confidence. You might also group comments around the quality of the content. Is it detailed enough? Is there enough evidence? And then, of course, how well the writing is organized in terms of sequencing, in terms of how the reader comes to that particular idea or concept. And then you can move on to, as the draft becomes much more stable, then you can move on to issues of language. But framing it as how effective the language is rather than your grammar is wrong is a way of building confidence. So, are the sentences clear? Can your reader see what you're trying to explain here? Is this piece dense or easy to read? Is the writing aimed at a particular audience? And underline good pieces of writing. It's really important for students to see positive responses and encourage students to see the value of revision. Ask them to highlight where they have made changes or where they've addressed your comments as a way of encouraging them to respond to every single comment that you've made. So when giving feedback, be honest and thorough, but use criteria so that they can work on specific things. Avoid criticizing, especially when it comes to emotional responses. I love this or I didn't like this. Try to be supportive in the way that the feedback is presented. And if you organize your feedback, then you are encouraging metacognitive skills with the students, with the student writers, so that they can see what you are looking for and they're able then to address that in future drafts. We've provided some references for you. There's a huge body of research on giving feedback on student writing. And we hope that you found something helpful in this video and that you can find something in here to help you respond to your students' writing.